All right. Hello, everyone. So, welcome to the second part of our discussion on criticisms on sources. So, last time, or for the last part, the first part of the video, we did talk about internal and external analysis. Now, this time, pag-usapan natin yung assumptions with the sources. First things that I must know when dealing with sources. Okay, so ito yung mga iisa-isahin natin na dapat nating gawin and every time we encounter a source that we think na could be utilized into writing historical narrative. All right, number 1. Syempre importante yung reliability. Sources like relics, artifacts, remains, documents, and witnesses are accurate when proven to be authentic and credible. Relics, artifacts, and remains, though, are more reliable, while documents or narratives and witnesses are more detailed and specific. Anong ibig sabihin yan? Well, between the documents and the material sources, talagang mas reliable yung material sources kasi mas mabilis po silang i-examine. I-carbon date mo lang kapag halimbawa fossil ganyan, bones, mga bahagi ng buhay na nilalang or meron kang ibang ways and means para examine naman yung kalumaan ng mga non-living objects. Pero at the same time, they kind of lack the detail na meron ng mga documents, At mas specific kasi yung nilalaman nun. Though yung documents naman, syempre mas kailangan sila ng extreme scrutiny. Aside from reliability, of course, you need to assume authenticity. The authenticity of a source increases the credibility of that source. Halimbawa, tingnan natin itong mga images na to, Ayan, for instance dito sa mga pages from the Boxer Codex. So yung Boxer Codex po class, ito yung collection ng mga illustrations na nagde-depict ng mga pre-colonial Filipinos as how they were seen by early Spanish chroniclers nung bumisita sila. So syempre bago tayo sakupin ng Spain, 'di ba? There were a series of expeditions from Spain to the Philippines which allowed them to first survey the islands before totally colonizing it. And so if you want to be more accurate, halimbawa, gusto mong gumawa ng artwork, gusto mo gumawa ng costume design representing the pre-colonial period of the Philippines, then you would definitely check the Boxer Codex. Next, in terms of authenticity, paano yung mga ganitong documents? Sir, how do we know when was the century na it was written, 'di ba? Tingnan lang natin class yung handwriting, or yung typography, kumbaga. Makikita natin yung strokes, yung arte nung letters, At matutukoy natin kung anong century na isulat or na i-publish yung isang material. So the more na flamboyant siya, mas luma siya kasi that means na hindi pa uso yung printing na ng maramihan. And so every piece of paper, every writing, every document was made carefully with hand. Yan. Okay, next. Bakit may picture ng kamatis at bawang, Si class, if you would want to understand the history of Italian cuisine, you would have to first understand the role of Christopher Columbus. Kasi tomatoes were not existent in Europe prior to the expedition of Columbus. So everything that we know about European cuisine today that has something to do with tomatoes, lahat ng pagkain na yun class ay nalikha na lamang after ng expedition ni Columbus. So may pre-Columbus, may post-Columbus period na tinatawag na makikita natin ano yung mga nagbago sa cuisine, sa diet ng mga Europeans dahil sa pagpapakilala ng mga plant species from South America to Europe, which includes tomatoes. And finally, we have the Laguna copper plate inscription. Ano? Ito lang po yung kaisa-isa na matuturing na nating piece of document na may kinalaman sa pre-colonial Philippines. So naglalaman iyan ng kasunduan sa utang. So of all subjects pa, utang talaga yung laman ng copper plate. Ayan po ay nakita sa may Laguna de Bai, kaya po tinawag na Laguna copper plate inscription at nakalagak yan ngayon sa National Museum. Sir, paano napatunayan na ito ay authentic? Well, tinignan yung material, yung copper plate, at napag-alaman nga yung date niya. So, hundreds of years na, mas matanda pa sa Spanish colonial period, colonialism, sa ilang simbahan natin. And nung nakita yung laman at yung characters, it matches the prevalent handwriting na adapt ng mga Tagalog mula sa India, or may mga plausible ideas na ito ay associated din with states from Indonesia, limbawa. Yan. So, marami pa ring mga unresolved aspects ng Laguna copper plate inscription, but one thing is for certain, ito ay legitimate. Next, primary sources. Primary sources, we should know that it is credible than a secondary one. Again, meaning mas mahalaga yung ma-access natin yung primary source kaysa doon sa naipasa lang yung information. So, napakalaking tulong talaga na we go directly to the primary source. Number 4, credibility. The credibility of a source is increased if it's corroborated by independent sources. So, kailangan nating ibangga yung source A sa source B para mas ma-check kung totoo nga ba si source A. So, there must be a certain level of agreement with them. And finally, number 5, bias. Sources would tend to be biased, especially if it's to its provenance, or to the one who made it or held its custody. Okay? Again, nasabi na natin kanina, there could be no way that a source can never be biased. Wala pong ganun. One way or another, sources are biased, and your goal or your job as a historian is to minimize these. Okay? So ayan, halimbawa primary source, gusto mo magbasa ng batas, o basahin mo talaga yung nung proceedings nung Congress or nung Senate, at ano talaga yung yung nangyari. Okay. Next, 'di ba? Corroboration, ayan. Bataan completely occupied by the Japanese, So paano mo masasabi na totoo yung sinasabi ng dyaryo na yan? Tignan mo din yung ibang dyaryo during that time. So nandiyan naman yung date, nandiyan naman yung kailan siya pinublish. So you can just simply look for other newspapers during that time and see if they tell the same thing. And then of course, kailangan din natin talagang malaman kung ano yung bias ng sources, and napatunayan ito minsan nung nag-remove yung Facebook na napakaraming troll accounts sa FB, even yung mga group na ang dadaming membership, kasi nga naman they keep on spreading false information. So the government even pleaded na wag mag-remove kasi sila yung natamaan Natamaan sila kasi all of these Facebook accounts are somewhat in a way associated with the government because they've been spreading government propaganda, government content na baseless, just to tarnish the reputation of the opposition. Number 6, conflict of interest. Ayan, pwede din pong minsan yung source hindi din siya dapat i-take as it is kasi baka nga naman may conflict of interest with what you're searching, 'di ba? Now, if sources like witnesses or their testimonies do not have immediate interest or direct involvement to the event, they become more credible than those who have direct interest or direct involvement. Again, example, never use things written by a person to write his or her biography alone. Kasi kung yung letters lang niya yung pinagbasihan mong source, hindi ka nagbangga sa iba, you're basically trying to just retell the way this person wanted to be, presented, no, to the world. So, you check that, no? And even yung pag-i-interview, halimbawa, about this person, while it's okay na mag-interview ng kamag-anak niya kasi nga naman kilala nila yon, no? Mas mahalaga din mag-interview ka ng labas doon sa family para naman ma-ensure mo na balance yung presentation. Again, corroboration, if all sources agree with one event, then it becomes usually factual or acceptable unless another source appears and refutes it. Number 8, no, paano naman kapag interview? Okay, testimonies of witnesses are credible if the witnesses are mentally and emotionally fit at the time of the interview or declaration. For instance, you want to interview old people, no, and try to ask them what they remember during this time. Napakahalaga pong malaman dapat muna na healthy yung i-interviewin natin, wala silang sakit like dementia or Alzheimer's, or hindi sila kaagad-agad mag-breakdown in case sa pag-usapan ulit yung matter. So mahalaga pareho yung physical and mental health ng ating participant para ma-ensure natin na reliable din yung kanilang mananarrate. Okay? O halimbawa, 'di ba? You want to search about air quality, o wag kang magse-search sa website ng Shell kasi yung Shell ay isang gasoline company na matagal na pong kilala sa kanilang mga tremendous activities that has tremendous impacts, no, on air quality. Yan. Nakita mo naman yung source ng The Guardian. Shell and Nigeria have failed on oil pollution cleanup, Amnesty says. O, iba yung sinasabi ng outside source, iba yung mismong sinasabi ng Shell. For instance, when you interview old people, again, you make sure that they can still tell you everything with clarity, accuracy. Okay? As much as possible, dapat consistent yung mga sinasabi nila, that it appears to be coherent, no? At hindi po yung parang may naisip lang sila, then all of a sudden, you treat it as it is. Number 9, napakahalaga din ito, class, contextualization. The source that does not conform to its milieu is considered a fabricated source. For example, a lot of people were abuzz, no, by the news na ang daming na-discover na Dead Sea Scrolls, no, na latest. And apparently, nung tinest ng mga experts kung totoo nga ba talaga yung laman ng mga Dead Sea Scrolls and even yung mismong paper, nalaman na ano pa lang sila, no, fragments ng mga fabricated sources. So ginawa sila, no, during the modern times. Okay? Oh, tapos even itong yung kay kay Balagtas, no? Malang Balagtas, no, na may association daw sila sa Majapahit Empire, ganyan, no? Even yung 10 Bornean datus, lahat yan kalat, no, nung early 20th century, and eventually napag-alaman na again fabricated din pala siya. So walang mabigat na basis, no? Ano pang pasok dito, no? Yung Taliano Gold. Kaya tigil-tigilan niyo yung paniniwala sa Taliano Gold na yan, class, kasi wala pong nag-iisang credible source on it except for the Supreme Court decisions debunking the claims of anyone who comes from the Taliano clan. Kasi bigla-bigla nila silang sumusulpot tas nang kiklaim sila ng lupa kahit wala silang basis. Imagine that. Oh, another example. Sige, explore natin yung kay Malang Balagtas, no? Yung kay Malang Balagtas, no, ina-assume niya na siya ay may direct association again sa isa sa mga 10 Bornean datus. It's a disputed early Spanish era Philippine document saying that in 1539, someone named Don Fernando Malang Balagtas, whose original name before his baptism as a Catholic was Pansomon, o Pansumon, no? Meron daw siyang iniwang document at kiniklaim ng kanyang mga kaapu-apuhan, kanyang mga descendant, na siya ay nag-iwan sa kanila ng ganitong amount ng yaman. Siyempre mapapatanong ka na, no? Tingnan mo yung date, tingnan mo yung pangalan, tingnan mo yung claims niya. So, papasok mo dito yung pag-check ng authenticity, context, accuracy of seal, consistency of dates, and so on. At napag-alaman, no, na bogus pala yung will of Malang Balagtas. Ayan. Okay, so, ilang beses na pong nangyari yan. Maraming mga events sa history kung saan na-discover na yung mga inaakala natin totoo hindi pala. Pero again, hindi dapat ito nanggagaling sa mga historian or yung mga nagpapanggap na historiador, dapat nanggagaling sa historian. Okay? Hindi yung istoryahe. Now, let's go to the last part of our lecture. No? Is there a way that sources can be in conflict with each other? Paano kapag hindi naman sila nagtutugma kahit pareho silang reliable? So these are the things that you need to know in case you encounter them. First, we call hostile sources, no? Yung types of sources na hindi nagtutugma. No? We call them hostile sources. Disagreeing or hostile sources are difficult to deal with, particularly when there is no enough evidence that deal with the event being studied. Here are some tips that the historian needs to consider when dealing with them. Number one, if two sources disagree with each other and there is no way wherein one could be examined over the other and vice versa, the source with more logical reasoning and which accords common sense would be considered. Sa pagkabasa mo, alin doon yung nag-make sense? Alin doon yung consistent? Malamang sa malamang siya yung legitimate. If sources or witnesses do not agree on certain points, the source that gives more proofs to its authenticity and credibility becomes more reliable. Okay, babalik tayo sa external analysis. Kasi sabihin natin na pumasa na nga sa external, napunta ka na sa internal, ngayon problemado ka kasi pareho mo silang kino-consider and you do not know kung sino yung nagsasabi ng totoo kasi they both disagree with each other. Again, balik ka sa external. Sino sa dalawang source yung mas makakapagpatunay na totoo siya? Alin sa dalawa yung mas authentic in a lot of ways? Then most likely, kung saan ka mas sure, kung saan ka mas maraming basis na totoo siya, dun ka. Okay. Halimbawa, 'di ba? Napakagandang example nung nangyari na yan, yung book ni Dr. Floro Kibuyen, no, yung A Nation Aborted, in which he tried to actually, hindi lang he tried, no, he was successful, no, in trying to shed light on what really happened, no, between Katipunan and Rizal, no, kasi a lot of people were already saying that Rizal did not support revolution, Rizal was not into violence, hindi sila okay na Bonifacio, and so many more. So, I mean, overall, 'di ba, parang ang view natin talaga is it's Rizal versus Bonifacio. But if we try to look further into the sources and kung paano nagpatuloy yung pag-fix ng narrative, no, kung nagkaroon ba talaga ng alitan between Katipunan and Rizal, no? Maraming mga na-debunk na information kagaya nung sinabi na Bonifacio talked to Rizal in Dapitan when in fact it was Dr. P. Valenzuela. And a lot of a lot of versions of their conversation say that Rizal was very opposing, no, against the revolution. Pero yung complete palang transcript ng kanilang pag-uusap, Rizal said that he was against it during that time because they were not ready. But he supports the idea of revolution if he knows that the Filipino forces are ready to defeat Spain. Kasi going on a battle with Spain when you're not prepared in terms of ammunition, weapons, 'di ba? You will definitely lose. Okay? And Rizal was very correct with that, no? Talagang maraming losses yung na-suffer ng Katipunan on its initial years, no? Talagang pagkatagal lang talaga, tsaka kaya medyo napila yung Spanish forces. So, Napaka-importante, no? Talagang we trust on these experts because these are the things that we cannot do on our own, especially if we don't have access to the materials. If the source or witness is hostile, it becomes less credible. Corroboration to other independent and types of sources would be more necessary. Okay? So, kung kaya namang humanap pa ng mas maraming source, 'di ba? Bakit ka magsisettle sa dalawa? Baka naman tong dalawang to hindi pala sila credible yung iba mo pang makikita. A source or witness that holds orientation from one school or thought or philosophy, Marxism, is usually argumentative or hostile with other sources. Thus, the milieu of the source or the events tackled must be examined by looking at other sources that convey the same theme and do not hold orientation from any school of thought. Yan, class, marami kasing mga historians before na ang common mistake nila or error nila is that they use a lot of framework, no? Parang may philosophy pinanggagalingan yung pag-narrate nila, which somewhat affects the narrative kasi pag hindi nag-fit yung data doon sa framework nila, hindi nila sinasama. So, overall nadi-distort yung kwento, no? Hindi talaga na fulfill yung goal na ikwento mo ng buo yung history based on what the data says. So mahalaga na whenever we read, alamin din muna natin if the historian or the author tries to put the perspective into a particular framework at kung maayos yung pagkakagamit niya kasi again, marami pong mga old books, classic books na super kinain ng framework yung narration kaya hindi na po din makita yung pinaka essence ng historical event. Okay? So, in collusion of sources, 'di ba? We try to to look for the similarities of these sources or if they agree with each other. Tingnan natin tong case na to. Halimbawa, source 1, A is responsible for an entire movement. Source 2, A is not involved in any of the events. Kung may ganyan kang source, then you look at the following details, the author, type of document, and etc. So when you try to list down these things that make the two different, diba? You will be able to know alin sa dalawa yung gagamitin mo at alin yung hindi nagsasabi ng totoo. From the get-go pa lang, from the author pa lang, kayang-kaya mo nang malaman yan. Now, when we do corroborate, it is the term we use to refer to the ability to compare information provided by two separate sources and find similarities between them. When a second source provides the same or similar information to the first, the second source is considered to corroborate. Okay? Meaning, if source A is supported by source B, then nag-corroborate sila. Finding corroboration between sources strengthens your conclusions, especially when you are making a historical argument. When choosing sources to corroborate, pick those that are deemed particularly reliable, which adds further certainty to your claims. Okay? So again, class, if you're doubting the reliability of one source, humanap ka pa ng ibang reliable. Okay? Nang sa gayon, ma-check mo yung reliability nila pareho. Okay? Again, pinakaunang target would always be the author at kung saan ito nanggaling or when was it published. Ayan. Balikan natin yung case. Look for the similarities. Find a way how to use them together in one narrative. If source 1 and 2 complements each other, then pwede mo siguro silang i-alternate yung paggamit sa kanila para mahabi mo yung story or let's say extract mo lang talaga yung unique points ng 2 na wala sa 1, yung unique points ng 1 na wala sa 2 para parehas mo silang magamit fully. And finally, I thought it was the last part ng number 3. Puntahan natin yung historian's etiquette. How should I act when dealing with sources? Okay? So, bilisan lang natin itong bahagi na to. These are the things that we need to know if we are dealing with historical research. Number 1, a historian is self-aware. Okay? Dapat alam mo yung biases mo, alam mo yung subjectivities mo, alam mo yung knowledge na meron ka na. Objectivity, again, try to present all sides, no? Huwag kang masyadong mag-side with one unless it is the truth talaga, no, that presents the side of this, no? Pero maganda na lahat ng sulok ma-address mo, lahat ng aspect maano mo, no? Ma-tackle mo or mahapyawan mo. Okay. Next, a good historical researcher is a rational one. Okay? So, hindi emotional, hindi gumagamit ng fallacies, no? Facts only, and tamang interpretation. Open-minded, no? Dapat a historian should be very open-minded, dapat bukas sa mga possibilities na magbago yung narrative or may i-reject siya na unang point na ginawa niya considering the sources. Scholarly intentions, dapat hindi ka na-impluwensyahan ng iba, hindi ka dapat bayaran, hindi ka dapat inuutusan para ikwento ito, ikwento ng ganyan. No? Dapat ikaw at your own will. Kasi gusto mong pagtanggol yung katotohanan. And of course, you should be honest, consensuous, and properly citing his sources. Pag hindi galing sa iyo yung idea, i-cite mo. No? Kasi pag nanakaw yun kapag hindi mo yun sinite. Kasi hindi naman yun sa'yo. Dapat nag-acknowledge ka din, lahat ng tumulong sa'yo, kinikilala mo. Dapat mataas yung standards mo kasi ayaw mo na malagay yung pangalan mo sa alanganin by being branded as a person who is irresponsible with his or her writings. No? Or involved ka sa dishonesty, fabrication, deception, cheating, or sabotage. You should also be scientific. Make sure that you follow the guidelines of the methods of history thoroughly, no? At talagang strict ka sa mga pamantayan mo. Engaging, dapat mahalaga din na marunong kang mag-deliver nung na-research mo sa publiko, hindi yung naiiwan lang sa mga kapwa mo matatalino yung na tutuklasan mo or yung mga findings nyo, no? Transparent, okay? Dapat lahat ng ginamit mo willing ka na ilista ng malinaw sa bibliography. And discerning. Ayan. Dapat you always try to entertain those ideas, those claims that may sound valid, may sound true. Okay, no matter how ridiculous it is at the first glance. But at the same time, pag na-discover mo nang hindi pala siya okay, then you let go. Should be original. Dapat sa'yo yan. Peer worker, marunong makisama sa iba. Dapat marunong kang makipag-collaborate. Open sa criticisms. Walang propaganda. Accepting, kasi nakakatanggap ka ng viewpoints ng iba. And of course, responsible. You do not use sources to twist history. You do not use sources to often degrade or devalue the impact of an event. Okay? It is a must. It must always be borne in mind that history is a relevant and moralizing discipline, that is why it must always be objective and accurate. And I end my lecture here. Hopefully, you've learned something for today. At if you have questions, pag-usapan natin sa synthesis natin. Maraming salamat at dito ako nagtatapos. Here are my references. All right. Goodbye, everyone.